Hello, welcome to the Get Unhooked for Families weekly coaching call. My name is Jason Coombs. For those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, welcome. I hope that this is beneficial, and thank you for all of those who are here live and supporting me. I draw a lot of strength from you, as I mentioned before I started recording. So thank you. I also want to thank those that faithfully watch these recordings and shoot me messages of what is helping, and you ask questions because that helps guide and direct the content. So this is one way I'm able to duplicate myself and just share information. And I get a lot of people that ask for help and they want my opinion, and then I invite them to this, and they don't come. So I just really wonder or they don't watch. And so I wonder if they really just want a quick fix answer, or if they're really interested in doing some work. And those of you that are watching and those of you that are here have proven that you are interested in doing some work. So it's awesome. Now this process really roots out of the experience that my mother and my family had as I was walking through my addiction. And at the time, my mother was desperately seeking solutions when she found out about my addiction. Once she could no longer deny it anymore, and once she realized that um, everything that she was doing wasn't working, she sought um, high and low for answers. And when you Google addiction help or how to help an addicted loved one recover, or something to that effect, you will get as many opinions as there are users on the internet. And this can be very confusing. And and typically, professionals in the field, they come from either the perspective of they've done all their research and dissertation, and they've got a doctorate, and so they've done their homework from a scholastic perspective. And then there's the perspective of professionals who just have a passion for the work, and they are the ones who offer their experience, strength, and hope. Both sides, unless there's an overlap, both sides are missing some really important meat. And that missing piece is combining evidence-based practices that take the family member or the influencer to the top of the learning curve, that's not just based on someone's myopic worldview or their experience with addiction, and combining the personal and practical application of that evidence-based practices. So what I try to do in the book that you see behind me on the wall is with Unhooked. It's really an idea to combine the and take readers to the top of the learning curve, where you guys are learning the evidence-based modalities, what really works and what's used in treatment centers throughout the world that shows results through studies. And I've seen it work personally in my life and in the the treatment center that I own and operate, Brickhouse Recovery. And then using the practical personal vignettes and narratives of my experience through those stages of change, and how my family used motivational interviewing technique, and how the spirit of motivational interviewing fostered connection. And we know that connection is the opposite of addiction. And how do you foster connection? And so my premise is to provide solutions that, if I could go back in time and offer this book and offer these calls to my mother, it would have saved her a lot of restless, sleepless nights. It would have helped her with the anxiety and depression that she walked through. It would have helped her avoid some of the dead ends that she ran into as she was seeking solutions by talking to people, um, or silently Googling and researching um, help. And back then there wasn't a lot of resources out there, and so now I think there are a lot of good resources out there, but there's a lot of garbage too. And so this this whole purpose is to help um, our family members, particularly my way of making a living amends to my mother and my father and my loved ones. And what's nice is that it's a passion of mine. It's what I love the most. I love working with the addicted population. I absolutely love working with the family members and guiding you guys. So last week we reviewed the steps to surrender. We did an intro to the steps to surrender, and it was right off of the topic of relapse and how relapse typically occurs and happens when one is ambivalent about their reasons for change. And as a reminder, ambivalence is when the costs and the benefits of change compete with each other. Change will typically happen when the costs of staying the same outweigh the the costs of change, and the rewards of change outweigh the rewards of staying the same, if that makes sense. And so we all go through this process with the stages of change in all of our life domains. And I often use the analogy or the metaphor of changing one's nutritional habits or exercise. And the goal setting process, the preparation process, the diets that we invest in, the trainers that we hire, the yoga studios that we become members of, and how long do we sustain that behavior once we engage and begin uh, that change process. And we all know that that's a cyclical process, and we have ambivalence throughout all of those stages of change. So what do you do when you do everything right and everything you possibly can to help your addicted loved one recover, but they don't respond? Um, that was the case of a situation that we had last week, where we have um, a funeral service tomorrow that resulted in, in obviously death. And this was his father's worst fear. And, this particular, well, I can share this. We're not sure the cause of death yet, but I can tell you that I hugged him. His name is Quay. I hugged him on Monday last week when I was over in our center in Idaho Falls. And Tuesday, he was gone. And we didn't know that he had passed away until I got a call on Saturday. So we just thought he was AWOL, or absent without leave. When we found out, I immediately reached out to his father and um, had a conversation with him. And of course, in tears, he shared with me a lot of sensitive and sacred and beautiful things. As I mourned with him, it really drove home this particular process of surrender on a real feelings level. It's one thing to read through the steps to surrender, and it's another thing to experience the transcending power of the steps to surrender. And this loving father, just such a tender man. Um, one day I will invite him to be a guest on this coaching call when he's ready, and hopefully he can share what his process is like. Um, but what is nice, you can never judge someone uh, and how they grieve or the grieving process. But I can say that when we talked, he sounds like he's in a good place. I know that difficult times are ahead, and emotions will surface, and it'll be hard. But I do believe that this is a timely topic to bring up. And last week we began the process of the steps to surrender, because you could do everything right and go through every book on influencing another person. You can practice this process through the 3 C's or the 4 C's, which is I did not cause the addiction, I cannot cure, I cannot control, but I can contribute to the addiction, or I can contribute to one's recovery. And you could be contributing to the recovery and still have an outcome like Quay's family. And what is what power comes through this process of surrender is as we begin to truly put our loved ones in the care of God, and we recognize where we end and where they begin, the very process of surrender helps us to stop perpetuating the addiction, at least contributing to the addiction, because we will communicate differently, we will love differently, we will have more empathy, we will be more boundaried, we will be able to let go of things that aren't ours. And the healthier we get, the more influence and light we will shine in their lives that will be attractive for their own recovery. And so manifesting recovery really starts with it. And we have all of our clients go through the process of surrender, because our clients have to surrender a lot of things when they begin the recovery process. They can't hold on to their attachments to their addiction and their addictive lifestyle. And so surrendering, I describe it oftentimes as letting go and relaxing into the current of God's power and God's flow. And a lot of times we think of surrender as waving the white flag and giving up and just laying dead in the trench. And that's not surrender for me. I really like the idea of God's loving power is constantly flowing, and that current that flows to us, through us, to bless the lives of others, particularly our addicted loved one, is only kinked when we get in fear and we get in selfishness, and we kink that flow through a scarcity mindset, through fear, through anxiety, and through unreasonable expectations of the outcomes. And as we can let go of that and allow this current to flow to us, through us, to bless the lives of our family members, and particularly our addicted loved ones and all others that we come in contact with, then that flow never stops. And so it's flow, not force. That's the best, I think, catchphrase that we can always remind ourselves when it comes to the serenity prayer and when it comes to the steps to surrender is ask yourself, am I forcing this, or am I just relaxing into the current and allowing the flow? Even if it results in death, even if it results in prison, even if it results in continued homelessness. And what is powerful about flow is that's where faith builds, and that's where you can really trust that there is a power that has your addicted loved one in mind and in his hands and is working on them in their moments where you aren't able to help. And I had a lot of those moments. I had a spiritual experience when I was homeless, as you guys will read in the Gift of Desperation chapter. You will also um, read about a spiritual experience. Actually, you won't, because I didn't put it in the book, but I had a spiritual experience when I was laying in jail with one of my deceased grandfathers. And I had a spiritual experience with him. And I had a spiritual experience when I was in my last treatment center. And I had a spiritual experience in one of my dreams. And so these are the kinds of things that you need to remember that you don't have power over, but there is a loving creator that does and can and is working on your loved one. And sometimes we have to stop playing God and we can step back and allow this process. Allow God to do his job, allow God to do what he does with his kids. And we're all his kids. The way I look at it is your kids or your loved ones aren't his grandkids. I mean, they're his kids, just like you are. So when you have a stewardship over your loved ones to help them or raise them or whatever the case may be, but also the bigger stewardship is how to overcome fear and move into faith. And your addicted loved one and this addiction in general might be the very life lesson that you are being blessed with. And I don't use that term lightly because my family is very grateful for my addiction and what we all have walked through. I also know quite a few, well, let me give one example. I also know a mother who started the Sobriety Foundation, and she and her husband um, have a nonprofit, and they uh, raise money to contribute to sober living scholarships. And their their son passed away. Their son passed away. But I just heard her on a podcast, and she actually said that she is grateful because she feels closer to her son now, and she feels like he is with her in this work, and they are helping so many individuals recover, even though her son Carson passed away. Um, it's a blessing, and that's what I'm trying to say is when we can let go of our outcomes and begin to trust uh, in a new way, in a fresh way, then the outcome will always be better than what we think it should be or will be. And that's really the benefit of the steps to surrender. So as we go forward, let me share my screen. We're going to just review the steps to surrender here. Linda, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to play the audio version real quick. Linda, can you hear me? You can? Great.
What page are you on, Jason?
This is page 171.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Turn to caring for yourself and skip the resentment. Surrender, put mission. I share her approach and my insights to surrender. Into practice liberates us from fear and emotional battlefields. With Lara's permission, I use them in my life and it really works. What? Okay, hang on. I am going to pause the recording real quick. I use them in my life and it really works. Number one, figure out where we have control and where we don't. Recognize that most of the stuff we worry about and seek to control is really outside of our control. Do we have control over his using? Can we control an overdose? Can we control his choices? Can we control his behaviors? Do we have control over death? These are all outside of our control. We are powerless over people, places, and things. Recognize where you end and others begin. Okay, so last week we talked about this section, right? And we went into where you have control and where you don't. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular part because you guys who are joining can go back and watch last week's. But as a reminder, for those of you who did the work this week, what I hope you gained is, as you walked through this inventory process, that you could see that there is a lot of work that is needed to be done just in these areas that contribute to lack of connection, lack of rapport, lack of trust with your addicted loved one. Because when our character liabilities are at play, when we're trying to help an addicted loved one recover, we will struggle with influence. The more that we work on these, and then we offer those up, we journal them, and then we offer those up to our higher power, it's nice because we begin to change. And this is a process. We change over time. And that is where you will find the peace and the serenity, and you will recognize more and more where you end and where your addicted loved one begins. And you will spend your time focusing on these things where you can actually make improvements in how you show up as an influencer. Because true influencers work on these things. True influencers don't show up and act like they have all the answers. True influencers will show up and say, hey, I am not sure the answer to your problems, but I just want you to know that I will be patient and I will support you any way that I can that will contribute to your recovery. And I love you no matter what. And I believe that you can do this. I do know that. I believe that you can do this. And that's supporting self-efficacy. That's allowing them to draw out their own ideas for change, and their own arguments for change, rather than you imposing ideas and telling them what they should and shouldn't do. It's more of a collaboration than a confrontation. And all of this will foster empathy, foster rapport and trust, which is the ultimate ingredient for connection. And without connection, It's really difficult to influence someone. So that's why this is your work. This is my work. Okay, so that's where we're going to go into the next step to surrender, is where you have control and where you don't. The next step is, okay, going back to my brother who passed away last week. Number 2, make friends with our worst fear and worst case scenario. Know that we'll be okay no matter what. What's our scariest fear that keeps us up at night? What happens if he doesn't change his life and get sober? Are we afraid of divorce, jail, overdose, or death? Or worse, are we afraid that he will needlessly suffer with this disease for 20 more years? Are we afraid his credit score will drop? Are we afraid he will lose his job and can't provide for his kids and spouse? What is our worst fearful scenario? Write it down. Now that we have clarified it, if that were to actually happen, we must honestly ask ourselves if we can still carry on. Can we survive, even though it will be extremely painful and sad? Would we let this destroy us? Or would we choose to do the work to transcend and heal from this? Can we be okay no matter what? I'm here to tell you, yes. One friend of mine, a mother of an addicted adult son, told me that her worst fear was that her son would die from an overdose. In her words, I spent a full day of imagining everything that would happen if I got the call that my son had died, where his funeral would be held, what our family would say, and even songs that would be sung. I wept and wept as if I had lost him. And then I wiped away my tears at the end of the day of surrender, and I was surprisingly okay. I would live through the worst thing. I had done all I could do to let my son know I loved him and was here when he was ready to get into treatment. Beyond that, I was at peace. If he died, I would be okay. Love was eternal. My love would go with him and his with me, no matter what happened to his physical body. He'd either find peace in heaven or peace in sobriety. The end of his addiction story was up to God, not me. Amazingly, God saved my son from addiction. He went into a drug-induced paranoid psychosis, and in a standoff involving a SWAT team, he was saved from himself and jailed. Eventually, he was sent to a mental hospital where he is getting the exact help he needs. So what is your worst fear and worst case scenario? Write it down. Okay. Not easy. Not easy stuff here. Linda, can you hear me? Okay, all right. What is your worst fear? What's your worst case scenario? When you think about all that you have done to help your addicted loved one, I want you to write this down, but I want you to close your eyes and just to go back underneath the anxiety, underneath the fear that is on the surface, underneath the anger and frustrations and the confusion. What is it that drives all of those feelings? I know deep down it's love. But what if love was looked different? What if love was allowing them an experience that will bring them closer to their maker? Or maybe meet their maker? What if love looked like that? I want you to to go in there within yourselves and write down, what is your worst fear? Is it death? Or I think I think this is a poignant example, and respectfully, I share this a comment that my dad made to my mother, and he will share this openly because he was in a spot where he was just so um, I think frustrated and confused and just tired of all my antics and addiction. And my mom's worst fear was that I would die. And they were sitting in lawn chairs out in the sun one day, and my mom was processing this with my dad, and he turned to her and he said, "Jana, there are worse things than death." Meaning, if he stays like this and we stay like this and we keep feeling this suffering for another 20 or 30 years, like I would I would choose I would welcome Jason's death over the other scenario. And and I get that. Like from my perspective, that doesn't make me feel bad or feel unloved, because I do think that it's like being in a concentration camp for 20 or 30 years over, going through a short one. And then, you know, I just think there are worse things than death. Um, Especially because I know personally, I believe that my brother Quay is in the loving arms of his creator today, and is free from the shackles of shame and addiction, where his beautiful spirit is allowed to be free. And I am not anyone's judge, but I know that when there's mental illness and there's substance use disorder, and a lot of factors that go into um, particular outcomes, that is between them and God. And I choose to believe that God is a very empathetic, compassionate, understanding, and welcoming God when his sick loved ones uh, cross over the veil into the spirit world, and he welcomes them with open arms and says, "Okay, now I've got a new work for you, and you're going to be helping from this side, and there's a lot of people that need your help. But first, let's get you better. Let's heal your soul." And of course, this isn't doctrine. This is perspective of Jason Coombs, one man who has, I think, a faith that serves me well, and um, because it's personal and it's alive, and that's what it takes for me to stay happy. So yeah, I just want to have you guys take that time and write down your worst fear and your worst case scenario, because the idea here is that you make friends with it. And what I mean by making friends with it is, as you write it down, it's like you're looking at it. So it's just I heard the most beautiful metaphor of the difference between a cow and a bison when a storm is coming is that the cow will run, turn its back on the storm and run away from it, and they never escape it because the storm's going to catch up to them and pummel them. And the longer they run, the longer they're in the storm because they're going with it. But the bison, and I don't say buffalo because I learned that buffalo are only indigenous to Asia and Africa, and we call buffalo in Yellowstone, but they're bison. Anyway, um, they're not indigenous to the United States. I had to learn that the other day. And the bison will actually put their head down and walk towards the storm. and they will power through the storm, and they will come out the other side much quicker because they're passing the storm. Um, and I love that. So that's kind of the idea with this making friends with the worst case scenario is instead of running from it, which actually has a higher chance of manifesting the very result that you fear. It's more about putting your head down and leaning into it and making friends with the storm. And then the steps beyond this step number 2, I promise you there's hope. I promise you that there's a step in there that's choose to believe in the best outcome. Choose to believe that he will transcend, that the worst case scenario isn't going to play out. So I don't want to like tee you guys up for depression, but going through the feelings of grief and loss and those stages of grief and loss, as you do what my dear sister Becky did with her adult son, and she actually went through the emotions of her son's death, it had no more power over her since that day. It lost all its power over her. So it wasn't consuming and obsessing her mind, and it wasn't causing anxiety and depression in her heart and emotions. And so she made friends with that scenario and was able to lean into it and put her head down and walk through that storm. And then on the other side, she not only witnessed God's miraculous loving hand and power, but had that experience actually played out and her son say he did pass away, she had already grieved that. And so there would be a quicker distance to acceptance, which is one of the 5 stages of grief and loss. And if you're interested in doing some more work on the stages of grief and loss, you're probably in one of those 5 at any given time, grieving the old uh, son or spouse or partner or sibling that you once knew before the addiction. And those stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you vacillate through those stages of grief and loss. And so does your addicted loved one when they're asked to get sober. They go through denial about giving up alcohol and drugs, anger about giving up alcohol and drugs, bargaining, well, maybe I can give up alcohol but not drugs, or maybe I can give up drugs but not alcohol. Maybe I can switch from scotch to brandy. Maybe I can just drink on holidays. That's bargaining. Depression. All of our clients experience a level of depression when they are breaking up with their mistress, alcohol or drugs, or mister, whatever the case may be. And acceptance comes. You know, when my wife lost her husband, her first husband, to a car accident when she was 26, she's a young widow. She had to go through all 5 of those stages. And you got to feel it to heal it. And I heard someone add this, you got to feel it, you got to deal with it, and then you heal from it. And I like that little middle addition, which is you got to deal with it, not just feel it, but deal with it. And this is the process of dealing with it and feeling it so you can heal from it, because a lot of you guys are running from the storm. And I say you guys in a sweeping statement, because this is typically the default, is we will run from the storm because we are so afraid of it. And in that running, we actually contribute to the addiction oftentimes. Now, I know a lot of questions come up with this. How do you know if you are contributing the right way or contributing to the addiction when it comes to making friends with the worst case scenario? I also know that questions will come up. How do you do this empathetically versus apathetically? Apathy is emotionally shut down and you don't feel. So you're just like, good, I hope he dies or I hope she dies. That's apathy, where there's no feelings attached to it. But doing it with empathy is different. And so, I recommend doing your work with your therapist. I recommend, if you don't have a therapist, to get a good therapist, and go through this process, because it's very healing and empowering. And continue to do your bibliotherapy. Um, and some of those resources need to be posted on my site, but Shannon mentioned one last week called Prodependence, um, or Prodependency, forget what it is. And then and that's on Amazon. There's also one called Codependent No More. It's a little bit, I wouldn't say, it's not outdated. The principles are sound, but some of the terminology might be a little, um, 15 years ago. But I will say that this process of making friends with the worst case scenario is one that I personally have to go through on an ongoing basis with my clients and loved ones. Because if I run an addiction treatment center and if I work in the addiction recovery and treatment industry, I would be in denial and avoidance if I thought that I wasn't going to walk through the loss of loved ones. But I choose to be in the arena. I choose to put my head down and walk into the storm, because I'm seeing more miracles than I am my worst fear. 100, maybe 1,000 times more miracles than I am seeing my worst fear of what happened last week. This is only the second client that I have lost to, well, and again, we don't know what the autopsy will say, but this is only the second client we've lost. And that's not a pat on our back. It's just, I can't live my life trying to treat individuals and love individuals, including my own addicted loved ones, which I have, family members, with that fear, because I'm not going to be good to any of them. So I choose to surrender that outcome, make friends with it, that I'm going to be going to some funerals in my life. And I'm going to be there to show up as a beacon of light. I'm going to do my work so that I can be there for the family and mourn with those that mourn. And I can rejoice with those that rejoice. And I can celebrate the milestones, and I can celebrate Quay's life tomorrow at his service. And that's what it will be, is a celebration of life and a celebration of what good he brought to this planet. And I'm going to mourn with those that were very dear to him, our other clients that are going through the stages of grief and loss and sadness. And my hope is that I can go in and just sit with them in that. And I'm not going to try to impose ideas on how they should feel different. And I'm not going to tell them that they shouldn't feel what they're feeling. I'm not going to talk them out of those feelings. What I'm going to do is validate their feelings. And then I'm going to, when prompted, I'm going to testify of the loving power of God and my beliefs that Quay's reunion with his creator is one that we should all aspire to prepare for, and recovery will do that. And I think it's just beautiful to go through this with you guys as far as a real life scenario of making friends with the worst case scenario. And I encourage you to continue doing your work with the 10th step inventory worksheet, with your journaling, because if you're doing your work, when you go through this process of writing down your worst case scenario or your worst fear, there are some of these that are going to flare up. And when they flare up, you can either stay in denial and avoid them, or you could actually write on them. And then you could ask God to remove them. Some of you might feel this resentment and this anger as you go through your worst case scenario. Some of you might feel the self-pity come up and notice it. Negative thinking, you know, the shame, the fear. Like, this is your work. This is my work. So that we can do this in our privacy, in our sacred spaces, and then we can leave our homes, or we can leave our bedrooms, and we can show up as beacons of light who are stabilizing influences in the lives of others. Stabilizing influences of light, not manipulative, controlling influences. Stabilizing influences of light that promote attraction to recovery, attraction to want to get to know God. One time I had a blessing, and the blessing said, live your life, Jason, so that when others are around you, they will feel God's love for them, and through you, they will have a desire to want to get to know Him. That has nothing to do with me or, uh, self-aggrandizement or wanting to be liked or anything. It's just doing my work, clearing away all of the blocks in my channel so that the flow of His light and love can come to me, through me, to bless the lives of others and show up for others with that light. And that's my work, is to clear away those blocks. My work isn't to go and force the light on others and tell them how to live. My work is to check myself, spot check inventories throughout the day, nightly inventories each night, offering up all of those stumbling blocks and character liabilities to my maker each night, my Heavenly Father, and ask Him to remove them. And over time, what's cool is I've grown out of some of those character liabilities, at least grown out of the frequency of using those. And it's heightened my awareness. And so I don't allow them to live within me as long, because He's helped me see them. Like, Jason, you're being a little whiny baby. Your self-pity's flaring up. And then it's like, God, will you please remove my self-pity so that I can be a channel of your peace? And I give these to you. Take away my negative thinking, take away my selfishness, my pride, my fear, and please do so that others will have a desire to get to know you, that I can be of use to you and bless the lives of your kids and be available, emotionally available to my family and to others, and help me to know who I could serve today. And then I wrap up my prayer And that's what a spot check inventory looks like for me on an ongoing basis. And that is, I think, what um, will change the world if everybody would do this process every day. Imagine if our politicians did this process every day. They checked their dishonesty and they checked their egos and pride. You know, um, anyway, that's a half joke, but more serious than joke. Um, anyway, good stuff today, you guys. There's more to come. Next week, we will go over letting go of your attachment to a specific outcome. So read ahead into the next steps to surrender and go ahead and do the work ahead of time. You don't wait for me. Do the work ahead of time and get some of these answers down so that as I'm explaining and expanding, you will just receive more depth to what you are working on. So try to work a week in advance. So go into step 3 to surrender and write that out, get familiar with it. And then when we go through it on next week's call, like I said, it will just be more of a deepening than an intro. So I want you guys to experience the deepening. So thank you so much for joining me today. More to come next week. And if I may ask a favor from all of you readers, will you please leave an Amazon review for Unhooked and an Audible review for Unhooked if you have not. The readers that are seeking help, the researchers, mothers, fathers, family members, those reviews have so much impact, even if it's not a good review. Maybe run that one by me first. Um, but I just want it to be honest. I don't want to um, sandbag. Anyways, thank you guys so much. We will see you next week.